Imagine you have a wire taped to your chest,
Oh, man. Just thinking about that makes me anxious.
right? Your heart rate is just skyrocketing.
Right.
Like maybe you're hitting 140 beats per minute, but you have to force your breathing to stay, you know, completely perfectly even.
Because the slightest change could give you away.
Exactly. And across the table from you is the person who essentially destroyed your life.
Yeah.
And they're ordering an expensive drink, they're making a joke, and you have to smile at them.
You have to act like everything is totally fine.
Yeah. You have to lean in, laugh at the joke, and pretend to be exactly what they want you to be. All while knowing that, like a single blink of a tiny red light under your jacket could mean your absolute ruin.
Which is just a terrifying amount of pressure for one person to hold.
It really is. And I mean, this isn't a scene from some Hollywood thriller, right?
Hmm.
This is the excruciating moment-to-moment psychological reality of an actual undercover sting.
And, it's a reality that's built entirely on a paradox. Because to expose a predator, you have to temporarily become their prey again.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a brutal way to look at it, but so true.
Right. You have to willingly walk back into the jaws of the very environment that traumatized you in the first place, and you're relying on nothing but an assumed identity and this incredibly fragile piece of technology.
A blinking red light.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
it requires a level of psychological compartmentalization that honestly most human beings simply do not possess.
Well, that level of compartmentalization, that immense friction between seeking justice and just surviving the pursuit, that is the exact territory we're mapping out today.
It's going to be a heavy one.
It is. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a really deeply intricate stack of sources centered around a 10-track concept album. It's called Going Native.
Such a great title, too.
Yeah, it really sets the mood. It's created by an artist, an advocate, and a podcaster named Ti-Fi. And what we're doing today is pulling apart the narrative architecture of this whole project.
Because it's definitely not just a normal album.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It isn't just a collection of songs you put on in the background while you're, like, doing the dishes. It is a meticulously designed psychological descent.
A complete journey.
Right. We're tracking a protagonist's evolution from this dark, adrenaline-fueled fantasy of a vigilante sting operation down into the grounded and honestly profoundly difficult reality of stepping away from vengeance.
To enter the social services field, right.
Exactly.
Yep.
So, okay, let's unpack this because
Yeah.
to really understand the weight of that transition, we have to look at the architecture itself.
Yeah, understanding Ti-Fi's background is absolutely essential here to ground everything for you listening. So she is the host of a podcast called Writer's Room for Reclaiming You.
Which is an amazing show, by the way.
It really is. And she's a musician, obviously, but she is also a former sex worker with her own lived experiences of trauma, abuse, and, systemic exploitation.
Right. It's not just theoretical for her.
Not at all. Currently, she's actually training to be a social services worker, and she's pursuing her peer support certification. So every single note, every lyric, every structural choice in Going Native is informed by that lived reality.
So it's deeply personal, even though it's fiction.
Exactly. What we're analyzing here is a sprawling, multi-layered fantasy. It's her fictionalized vision of, orchestrating a massive undercover operation to catch her own abusers.
And, she has actually explored this thematic territory before, right? Like with a previous project.
She has, yeah. She released an earlier concept album called Expose, and that one also dealt with a fictional undercover narrative aiming to dismantle a syndicate of abusers.
Okay, so this is like a continuation or an evolution of that theme.
Yeah, exactly. But Going Native takes that baseline concept and pushes it into an entirely different emotional dimension. I mean, it doesn't just ask how we catch the people who hurt us, it asks the much more difficult question of what happens to our own humanity while we're trying to catch them.
Oh, that is such a heavy question. And I think that brings us to the very first thing you encounter when you press play on this album.
The disclaimer.
Yes. Before you hear a single instrument, before there is any melody or rhythm to ease you into the experience, you are hit with this strict, formal, spoken disclaimer.
It's so intense.
It genuinely sounds like a legal document being read into the microphone. Like, Ti-Fi explicitly states that this is a fictional portrayal. She says, and this is a direct quote, she says, it's a vision of what I would do, not a record of things I have done.
It is honestly an incredibly jarring way to begin a piece of entertainment.
Jarring is the perfect word for it. I mean,
Mm.
from a purely artistic standpoint, it's almost entirely counterintuitive, right?
Usually art wants to pull you in immediately.
Yeah.
Oh.
Usually art tries to immediately immerse you in the illusion. It wants you to forget that you're listening to an album or watching a movie. But here, Ti-Fi just like stops you at the door.
She holds up a stop sign right away.
She really does. She goes on to meticulously clarify her professional standing. She states that she is not a registered social services worker yet. She is not a therapist. She has no affiliation with law enforcement. And she's not an active undercover journalist.
It's very thorough.
It is. It's like pulling down the heavy metal safety harness on a roller coaster before the ride starts. You know that loud click?
Oh, yeah, the one that tells you you're locked in.
Exactly. It locks into place, and it's telling you, hey, the environment you are about to enter is hostile. You are going to be thrown around in the dark, but we have checked the physical boundaries. You are safe in the seat.
What's fascinating here is that safety harness analogy because it illustrates the actual mechanics of what she's doing. Neurologically speaking, Ti-Fi is actively practicing trauma-informed care through the medium of audio.
Wait, can we pause right there for a second?
Sure, what's up?
Because trauma-informed care is, well, it's one of those phrases that gets thrown around a lot,
Yeah.
like in corporate wellness seminars and HR meetings. But what does it actually mean in a functional, practical sense? Like, how is an album practicing it?
That's a great question. So, in a traditional non-trauma informed framework, when a system or a person encounters someone who is struggling or acting out, the underlying question is usually, what is wrong with you?
Right. Very blaming.
Yeah, it's a diagnostic, often punitive approach. But a trauma-informed framework fundamentally shifts that question to what happened to you.
Oh, I see. It looks at the cause, not just the symptom.
Exactly. It recognizes that an individual's behaviors or triggers are very often adaptive responses to past severe stress. So applying that to media consumption, when you just drop an audience into a graphic depiction of exploitation, abuse, or deep psychological terror without warning, you are potentially triggering those adaptive responses.
You're just hitting their raw nerves.
Right. You are literally hijacking their central nervous system. So by starting with a strict disclaimer, Ti-Fi is establishing psychological consent. She is outlining the parameters of the threat before it even appears.
And she even provides actual functioning phone numbers right in the introduction. Like, she lists 211 for community and social service referrals and 988 for the suicide and crisis lifeline.
Exactly. She's providing the off-ramps before the highway speeds up. I mean, this is a radical departure from how we typically consume intense media.
It really is.
Yeah.
I want you to think about how you, the person listening to us right now, how you interact with true crime or gritty psychological thrillers.
We binge them.
Right. We usually treat the darkest, most traumatic moments of other people's lives as, like, passive entertainment while we fold our laundry or commute to work. We consume it so recklessly.
It's just background noise to us.
Yeah, but Ti-Fi is refusing to allow that kind of passive consumption. By forcing you to listen to this disclaimer, she's demanding that you carry the weight of the subject matter responsibly. She is actively taking care of you before she asks you to witness the darkest parts of her fantasy.
And setting that boundary is a profound act of empathy, especially because the descent that immediately follows is so methodical and chilling. I mean, once the disclaimer ends and the boundary is drawn, the narrative plunges straight into the obsessive preparation of our protagonists.
We're talking tracks 1 and 2 here, right? The front page and borrowed wardrobe.
Yes. We see a total transition from someone who has been a passive victim of a system to someone who is actively calculating its destruction.
Yeah. In the front page, the protagonist trades in their quiet evenings and any semblance of a normal life for a, quote, notepad and a lens.
They're gathering intel.
Exactly. They aren't throwing a brick through a window. They aren't reacting with impulsive violence. The rage is entirely internalized and channeled into calculation. The stated goal is to spill the truth, but to spill it with ink.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the choice of ink as the weapon is a really fascinating mechanism. The protagonist recognizes that against a vast, deeply entrenched network of exploitation, what she calls the big machine operating right beneath our feet, a badge or a gun is often totally useless.
Because the corruption is just too deep.
Right. The players are way too insulated. The only mechanism that can actually dismantle an insulated system is undeniable documentation. It's the willingness to dig through the absolute worst of human behavior, as she says, buried deep beneath the gravel and the dirt, and document it methodically.
I really want to focus on that sensory language for a moment. like buried deep beneath the gravel in the dirt. It establishes this incredibly gritty, filthy baseline.
It feels very heavy.
It does. But immediately, the protagonist has to construct a disguise that is the exact opposite of that grit.
Hmm.
To infiltrate this syndicate in borrowed wardrobe, they have to put on a borrowed wardrobe.
It's a costume.
Yeah. We're talking heavy makeup, restrictive heels, and a completely fabricated persona. They walk into this labyrinth of, quote, velvet and deceit, which is this high-end environment where VIPs are casually purchasing the strangers that they meet.
The visual and thematic dissonance there is totally intentional. You have the literal dirt and gravel of the reality of human exploitation, but it's masked perfectly by the velvet lie of manufactured high-end glamour.
It's all about appearances.
Exactly. The predators use this glamour as an architectural shield. If the room is beautiful, if the champagne is expensive, if the tailoring is perfect, society is far less likely to look at the gravel underneath.
They just don't want to see it.
Right. So to get past that shield, the protagonist has to become a phantom name, just another perfectly polished gear inside the big machine.
Looking at the mechanics of this borrowed wardrobe, it struck me that it functions exactly like a deep-sea diving suit.
Oh, that's interesting in terms of the pressure.
Exactly. Think about it. If you want to explore the bottom of the ocean, you are entering an environment that is fundamentally hostile to human life. The pressure down there will crush your lungs in a second.
So you need serious protection.
Right. So you have to seal yourself inside this incredibly heavy, rigid suit. The heavy makeup, the fake smile, the heels, the phantom name. That is the suit. It protects the protagonist's true identity from the crushing, hostile pressure of the predators all around them.
But the trade-off is pretty severe.
Oh, absolutely. The suit restricts your movement. It alters how you interact with the world. And most dangerously, you have to maintain absolute rigid emotional control. If you panic, if your breathing hitches, if a tiny crack forms in the glass of that helmet, the pressure of the ocean will rush in and destroy you instantly.
That is a really brilliant way to understand the psychological state of the protagonist, because the lyrics specifically talk about keeping ice inside a steady heart.
You just can't show anything.
You really can't. You cannot allow a single drop of genuine emotion, whether it's terror, disgust, or rage, to leak out. And this highlights a brutal psychological reality of undercover work. It's the immense trauma of having to masquerade as the very thing you are trying to dismantle.
It must be mind-bending.
It is. You have to stand in the center of a room surrounded by people who view human beings as disposable commodities, and you have to nod and smile and pour their drinks.
And while you're maintaining this impossible facade, there is this chilling realization that the people running the machine are completely at ease. Ti-Fi sings about how upper management sleeps while the exploitation just grinds on beneath them.
Right, because the corruption is so perfectly entrenched that it requires no active maintenance from them. The predators at the top are entirely insulated by their wealth. They believe they're untouchable, sleeping soundly while the protagonist stands wide awake in their parlor, wearing that deep-sea suit, gathering their secrets.
But the disguise, the suit, that's only the psychological barrier. The actual visceral danger, the physical mechanism of the sting, relies on technology. And this brings us to an incredible shift in the narrative's tension with track 3, Concealed Frequency.
The focus really zeroes in on the sheer physiological terror of wearing a wire.
The architecture of this sequence is just masterful because it strips away all the glamorous illusions of the undercover world and reduces the entire stakes of the narrative down to a single blinking, tiny ruby light.
It's all about that light.
Yeah. The protagonist is walking around these velvet rooms as a literal walking antenna. They have a transmitter physically taped to their skin, concealed beneath the dress. And that red light is the ultimate double-edged sword, right?
Because it's their only weapon.
Exactly. On one hand, it is the only mechanism that can capture the truth. It's the hope for justice. But on the other hand, if a single client or a bouncer or a manager spots that red light through the fabric, the protagonist is entirely alone behind enemy lines. It is an immediate death sentence.
And to communicate the severity of that threat, Ti-Fi doesn't just rely on the lyrics, she actually manipulates the soundscape itself to alter the listener's physiology.
Wait, I actually wanted to ask you about this. When I was listening to this specific part of the source material, I noticed that the tempo and the instrumentation changed drastically. There's this pulsing synthesizer loop and a really erratic, fast drum pattern. It genuinely made me feel anxious just sitting at my desk.
Oh.
Is she intentionally creating a hostile listening environment?
Yes, absolutely. It is a biomimetic technique.
Biomimetic?
Yeah, so by matching the drum pattern to an elevated racing heartbeat, she is forcing your autonomic nervous system to mirror the physiological stress of the protagonist.
Oh, wow. So she's hacking my brain.
Kind of, yeah. You aren't just hearing about the anxiety, your body is being tricked into experiencing a mild version of it. You are breathing with the protagonist as they try to keep their voice steady, trying to make sure the microphone isn't muffled by the fabric of the borrowed wardrobe.
And as you're trapped in that elevated heart rate, you become hyper-aware of the environment around you. Typhi specifically points out the concept of ambient noise in her notes.
The use of ambient noise here is a brilliant sociological critique. In these high-end, exclusive parlors, the ambient noise, the clinking of crystal glasses, the soft jazz, the polite, hushed chatter, it's entirely engineered.
It's on purpose.
It is used as an acoustic mask for profound hypocrisy.
Hmm.
The most brutal, corrupt transactions, the buying and selling of human capital, happen under the soothing cover of luxury.
It's sickening, honestly.
It is. The protagonist is standing in the middle of this engineered tranquility, hyperventilating on the inside, just waiting for the static on the wire to pop so the signal can clear, capturing the audio that will eventually tear the room down.
But, holding that posture, existing in that state of hypervigilance where your body is literally screaming at you to fight or flee, but you're forcing yourself to smile and serve drinks, it takes a devastating toll.
You can't run on adrenaline forever.
No, the adrenaline eventually burns out. And what is left in its wake is an incredibly heavy, crushing exhaustion. This is where we encounter the concept of the tally in track 4.
What's fascinating here is that the concept of the tally is perhaps the most crucial psychological pivot in the first half of the narrative. When we think of a tally in an investigation, we usually think of a ledger.
Right, like a list of crimes committed.
Exactly. A count of illegal transactions, a record of the evidence. But Typhi subverts that entirely. The tally she is tracking is the internal, emotional cost of being a witness.
The protagonist says, I'm silently absorbing all the profit and the pain. Like they aren't just a tape recorder. They are a human being acting as a sponge for the worst elements of society.
That takes a massive toll.
They sit in this lobby, breathing in the stale perfume and greed, watching wealthy predators consume lives they don't need, and the protagonist has to absorb all of it without flinching.
It really highlights the concept of moral injury.
Moral injury. How is it different from PTSD?
Well, we talk a lot about PTSD, which is often rooted in fear and a threat to one's physical life. But moral injury occurs when you are forced to participate in or bear witness to actions that violently transgress your deepest moral beliefs.
Ah, I see. It's a betrayal of your core values.
Exactly. The silent witness has to watch human lives getting, quote, entirely rearranged. And they have to do nothing to stop it in the present moment, because stopping it would blow the cover and ruin the chance for systemic justice.
I really struggle with the mechanics of this, honestly. Like, how long can a human brain actually sustain that? If you think about the environment as a literal toxic gas, the greed, the exploitation, the danger, how long can someone hold their breath in that room before the toxins seep into their own bloodstream?
Not very long, usually.
The lyrics describe this passage of time as a rusty iron chain dragging the hours along.
The brutal reality is that many cannot sustain it. The human brain is just not wired to indefinitely suppress its own moral compass while marinating in trauma. It requires a punishing, almost sociopathic level of focus to keep the aching chest closed and the cover intact, especially when, as the narrative states, everything inside wants to burn away this place.
I want you listening to this, to try and connect this extreme scenario to a feeling you might actually recognize. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to bite your tongue in the face of blatant injustice?
I think we all have, at some point.
Right. Maybe you had a deeply toxic boss, or you were witnessing a family dynamic that was completely unfair, and you knew that if you spoke up, you would be the one fired, or you would be the one excommunicated. You had to just sit there and absorb the unfairness.
It's a terrible feeling.
Now imagine that feeling magnified by 10,000. Imagine that the stakes aren't a paycheck, but human lives. And imagine knowing that you hold the power to stop it, but you have to wait for the exact right moment. That is the crushing weight of the tally.
And pressure of that magnitude cannot be contained indefinitely. It behaves like a physical law. Eventually, the pressure has to find a release valve. For our protagonist, that release comes not from breaking their cover, but from shifting their gaze. They realize that staring at the street-level exploitation is only capturing the symptoms. To release the pressure, they have to look up.
Yes. The narrative takes a massive, aggressive pivot here in tracks 5 and 6, Boardroom Predators and The Paper Trail. The protagonist's focus shifts from the dark, neon-lit parlors up to the brightly lit, sterile penthouses where the real architects of the machine live.
Going after the top of the food chain.
We move from gathering evidence on the floor to hunting the boardroom predators.
This represents a total inversion of the power dynamics we've seen so far. Up until this point, the protagonist has been vulnerable, reactive, and restricted by their disguise. Now they become the active, methodical hunter.
And the targets are the untouchables. The executives hiding behind expensive tailoring and velvet robes. The people who sign ironclad non-disclosure agreements with arrogant pride.
Using them as weapons.
Yeah, treating NDAs not as legal protections for trade secrets, but as weapons to enforce silence on the vulnerable. These are people who purchase human capital just to decorate their corporate suites.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Ti-Fi is delivering a very sharp, necessary critique of how society views crime. We have been conditioned to view street-level crime, the gravel and the dirt, as the ultimate societal failure.
We see it on the news every night.
Right. But white-collar crime is often treated as a bloodless, almost victimless game of numbers. Ti-Fi completely strips away that illusion. These boardroom predators aren't just moving abstract funds, they are manipulating entire systems to commit absolute fraud, insulating their assets in offshore accounts while the streets below them literally burn.
It's infuriating.
They pour expensive wine into crystal glasses, completely insulated from the futures they are extinguishing to buy that wine.
But their insulation has a fatal flaw. Because the protagonist is in the room with them, the lyric goes, "I'm reading the lips and I'm catching the names."
They're gathering the puzzle pieces.
The protagonist is drawing the connections, pulling all the disparate pieces of the tally together, and mapping it out to catch the very top of the food chain. And the mechanism they use to do this is so fascinating to me because it is incredibly mundane. The weapon that brings down the syndicate isn't a firearm. It isn't a dramatic physical confrontation. It is a spreadsheet.
Forensic accounting as an act of righteous vengeance. It is a brilliant narrative choice.
It really is. The imagery in this section is just incredibly satisfying. Ti-Fi uses this constant ticking clock percussion in the background of the tracks. It creates this inescapable rhythm, symbolizing that time is literally running out for the syndicate.
Tick-tock.
Yeah, exactly. And the lyrics are entirely focused on ledgers, wire transfers, digital footprints, and forged invoices. She sings about finding the anomalies and highlighting them in yellow marker ink.
To understand why this is so effective, you have to understand the mechanics of money laundering and corporate protection. Syndicates use a process called layering.
Layering, like an onion.
Sort of. They create dozens of shell corporations, fake vendors, and offshore accounts to create an impossibly complex maze. They believe that no law enforcement agency has the time, the budget, or the sheer obsessive willpower to trace a single dollar through 50 different fake companies. They rely on the exhaustion of the system to protect them.
It's like a massive, hopeless knot. You know when you find a delicate chain necklace at the bottom of a jewelry box, and it is just tangled into a solid, impossible knot?
Oh, the worst.
Most people look at that and just throw it away. The effort to fix it just isn't worth it.
Precisely. That's what the criminals count on.
The predators look at their web of NDAs and shell corporations, and they see a knot that no one will ever untangle. But they totally underestimate the patience of someone who has been absorbing their cruelty. To a methodical investigator, to someone carrying the weight of the tally, that knot isn't a shield. Every single loop in the knot is just a data point.
It's just a routing number.
Right. The protagonist sits there in the quiet, patiently pulling the threads, tracing the wire transfers across international borders, highlighting every lie in yellow marker ink until the entire knot simply falls apart.
And it is at this exact moment that the narrative reaches critical mass. The data collection is complete. The mountain of receipts is undeniable. The files are closed and locked. The dam they have been building for months is finally ready to break.
Which launches us into the absolute explosive climax of the album track 7, Sunday Edition.
Oh, this is where it all comes together. If the first half of the journey was about tension and suffocation, the Sunday Edition is pure, unadulterated catharsis. It is the neurological release of all the pressure that has been building since the safety harness locked.
The sensory details here are massive and overwhelming. You can literally hear the roaring of the printing presses starting up at the break of day, the physical weight of the black ink hitting the front page of the newspaper.
The truth is finally out.
The headlines become a beacon. And every single secret, every hushed conversation from those velvet parlors is dragged out into the blinding light of the morning.
Ti-Fi uses huge, roaring electric guitars to simulate the sheer scale of the destruction. You can hear the sirens echoing down the financial district. The boardroom executives, who thought they were totally untouchable, are suddenly staring at the ticking clock, realizing the shell companies have been breached and there's nowhere left to run.
Their entire empire is folding like a house of paper cards.
Exactly.
There's a lyric here that actually gave me chills. This is the exact justice that I was about. It is the beautiful, devastating conclusion to the mess. The warrants are being delivered by federal agents to the penthouse suite. The meticulous spreadsheets and documents are scattered across the marble floors of the Untouchables.
And where's the protagonist in all this?
They're just standing across the avenue, watching the red and blue flashing lights reflect off the glass. They're watching the aliases and the phantom names burn in the fire of the press. The undercover operation is done. The bad guys are caught. The equation is finally balanced.
It is an incredibly victorious energy. It hits every single receptor in our brain that craves retribution. But, and this is where Ti-Fi elevates the entire project from a simple revenge fantasy into a profound psychological study. It raises an incredibly uncomfortable question.
I know exactly where you're going with this, because I felt the drop-off too.
What happens the day after the villain is caught?
Right, what happens on Monday?
In almost every piece of media we consume, every action movie, every true crime documentary, every superhero comic, the story ends exactly at the flashing lights.
The sirens wail, the bad guy goes into the back of the squad car in cuffs, and the credits roll over a triumphant soundtrack.
Exactly. We are conditioned to believe that punitive justice punishing the perpetrator is synonymous with healing the victim. But Ti-Fi's lived experience knows that is a neurological and systemic lie. Catching the bad guy does not magically repair the structural damage they caused. It does not erase the tally.
So the damage is still there.
Yes. The trauma pathways in the human brain do not care about legal victories.
Wait, explain that. What do you mean the brain doesn't care about legal victories?
Okay, so when a person experiences severe, prolonged trauma, their autonomic nervous system gets stuck in a state of hyperarousal. The fight, flight, or freeze response. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism. Taking down a syndicate, wearing a wire, coordinating a sting, all of that requires massive amounts of adrenaline and cortisol.
They're just running hot all the time.
Exactly. It keeps the protagonist locked in that sympathetic nervous system state. When the bad guy is arrested, the logical brain knows the threat is gone. But the nervous system doesn't read the Sunday paper. It only knows that the massive influx of adrenaline has suddenly stopped. What follows is a brutal, inevitable physiological crash. The nervous system is still dysregulated, but now it has no target to focus on.
That is deeply unsettling, but it makes so much sense. I want you to really think about the mechanics of this in your own life. Think about a time when you achieved a massive, all-consuming goal, something you obsessed over, something that required you to put on your own armor and fight for months or years. You finally get the promotion, you finally win the lawsuit, you finally finish the grueling project.
The dopamine hits.
But the moment the high fades, the moment people stop clapping, what are you actually left with? You're sitting alone in your apartment, the adrenaline is gone, the armor is suddenly just heavy, and you have to figure out how to simply exist in a quiet room again.
And facing that quiet room triggers the final, and arguably most important, evolution in the narrative. The protagonist has to make a choice. They can either find a new target and stay addicted to the adrenaline of vengeance, or they can step off the battlefield entirely.
Total pivot.
Yes. They pivot from punitive justice tearing a corrupt structure down to restorative healing building a healthy structure up.
We enter the final act, tracks 8, 9, and 10. And honestly, the first step of this final act is the bravest moment in the entire narrative. The protagonist writes a resignation letter in track 8.
It is an incredibly vulnerable shift in tone. The roaring guitars of the Sunday edition fade out, and we are left with a quiet, reflective honesty. The vigilante life is over.
The visual is so stark. The protagonist is standing in front of a mirror, physically scrubbing off the heavy makeup, peeling off the deep-sea suit that protected them but also suffocated them. They're packing the tiny tape recorders and the transmitters into a cheap cardboard storage bin.
Putting it all away.
And they come to this massive, sobering realization. They sing, "The thrill of the pursuit is a temporary high. I cannot spend my future living in a manufactured lie."
I want to emphasize how much courage it takes to walk away from power. The protagonists just prove they have the intelligence and the ruthless capability to dismantle a syndicate of untouchable billionaires.
They're essentially a superhero at this point.
Right. The editor of the paper is probably calling them, offering congratulatory glory, begging for the next investigation. But the protagonist recognizes the toxicity of that path. They recognize that if they keep wearing the phantom name, they will eventually lose their own. They are burdened by the weight of a professional disguise.
I genuinely struggled to understand this choice the first time I listened. If you have the power to take down predators, why would you stop? Isn't taking down bad guys the ultimate moral good? Why choose to just resign?
Because taking down bad guys focuses all your life force on the darkness. It requires you to constantly look at the gravel and the dirt. Typhi is making a profound statement here. You cannot heal a wound while you are still constantly picking up a sword to defend it. The protagonist types out their resignation letter in a standard, boring font. They sign their actual real name, reclaiming their identity, and they state their new intention. I want a quiet classroom, a steady, simple pace, a completely different future in a totally new place. They are actively choosing the boredom of normalcy over the intoxicating abyss of vengeance.
Which catapults us into an entirely new environment with Track 9, Autumn Semester. The contrast is like walking out of a dark movie theater into the bright afternoon sun.
The acoustic shift here is beautiful. It's bright, it's upbeat, it possesses this joyful, grounded energy. The dark, neon-lit parlors and the velvet ropes are completely gone. We are now standing on a university park where the leaves are turning yellow on the quad.
And pay very close attention to the shift in the language. The protagonist is sitting in a lecture hall. They note that the professor is speaking about systems of support.
Right.
And the protagonist realizes this is a completely different language than a criminal report.
It's totally reframed.
They are no longer studying how to track illicit wire transfers or layer shell corporations. They are studying frameworks of intervention plans. They are literally charting out exactly where a healthy boundary stands.
This is the neurological shift from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system.
The rest and digest state.
Yes. The protagonist is finally breathing, as Typhi writes, easy air. They realize that a vocation dedicated to helping others is a deeply meaningful role that does not require living in constant fear of discovery.
The imagery is so tactile and wholesome. A heavy textbook resting on a wooden desk. A syllabus highlighted in green ink, which is a stark contrast to the yellow marker used to highlight corporate fraud. A spiral-bound notebook and a freshly sharpened pen. It is the pure optimism of a blank slate. The lyric that anchors this whole section is, learning the theory to bandage up a heart.
And the beauty of this transition is that the protagonist isn't erasing their past, they are refining it. Which brings us to the conceptual core of Typhi's ultimate message, introduced in the final act, the idea of competency by degree.
This is Track 10, Core Modules. We find ourselves in the hopeful finale of the narrative. We have moved from the isolated paranoid detective hiding in the corner of a velvet room to a connected peer support worker, setting up a community space.
The scene is incredibly simple.
It is. They are arranging folding chairs into a perfect circle on the linoleum floor of a community center. There is a hand-painted welcome sign hanging on the door. The smell of cheap coffee is brewing in the corner.
And inside that circle of chairs is where competency by degree takes place. The protagonist is taking the grim, horrific things they witnessed in the underground, taking their own raw, lived trauma, and rather than letting it fester into bitterness or vengeance, they are processing it through formal education and peer support training.
They are translating it.
Yes, the lyric states, "We are translating the struggles into a language we all know."
So how does that actually work mechanically in a peer support setting? Like, how does the trauma become a tool?
Okay, think of it like a physical therapist who specializes in rehabilitating torn ACLs. If you go to a therapist who has only ever read about a torn ACL in a medical textbook, they can give you the exercises, but there is a disconnect. They don't truly know the agony of trying to walk on that joint.
Right, it's just book knowledge to them.
Exactly. But if your physical therapist has completely torn their own ACL, endured the surgery, and fought through the agonizing months of rehab to walk again, their guidance is inherently more trustworthy. They aren't just reciting theory. They possess a bodily knowing of your pain.
That makes total sense.
That is competency by degree. The protagonist is taking their fractured past and using it to establish immediate, profound trust with people who are currently broken.
Turning hard experiences into a brand new key. That is the lyric that absolutely broke me. You aren't pretending the door was never locked. You are taking the metal from the cage that held you, melting it down, and forging a key to unlock the door for someone else.
That's beautifully said.
You don't have to be an untouchable billionaire, and you don't have to be a vigilante superhero. You just have to sit in a room with a circle of chairs, hold a cup of coffee, and share the heavy weight with someone who knows you understand.
It is the realization that, as the final song declares, the trauma is a baseline, but it isn't the entire song. It provides the rhythm, it informs the depth of the music, but you have the absolute agency to write a completely different melody on top of it.
Think about the absolute scale of the journey we just mapped out today. We started locked in a roller coaster car with a chilling disclaimer. We waded into the deep-sea pressure of the undercover world, feeling the physiological terror of a blinking red wire.
We felt that heartbeat monitor.
We really did. We carried the agonizing tally of invisible labor. We utilized the cold forensic machinery of the paper trail to pull down the architects of exploitation. We stood in the flashing lights of the Sunday edition, feeling the roar of catharsis. And then, we made the incredibly brave choice to walk away from the fire.
To just put it all down.
Yeah. We washed off the disguise, sat down at a wooden desk with a green highlighter, and found quiet grace in a circle of folding chairs.
If there is a definitive architectural thesis to extract from Typhi's work, it is this. Vengeance, while it may sometimes be a necessary mechanism to dismantle corrupt structures, is ultimately a temporary fuel. It will eventually burn you alive from the inside out.
You can't run on it forever.
No, you can't. But a policy of care, the quiet, unglamorous work of building community, studying frameworks of intervention, and sitting with people in their pain, that is a permanent foundation. By choosing to step away from the center of the dramatic scene, by establishing a healthy, rigid boundary, you are not surrendering to the predators. You are simply changing the battlefield.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. You are moving from a paradigm of retribution, which only looks backward at what was destroyed, to a paradigm of restoration, which looks forward to what can be built.
And that completely reframes how we look at taking our power back. When we started this conversation, we talked about how the scales of justice are broken, how the checkbook of right and wrong cannot be balanced when you're dealing with systemic exploitation.
Because the system itself is rigged.
Right. What Going Native proposes is that the goal isn't to force that broken scale to balance. The goal is to realize the courtroom itself is fundamentally flawed. Walk out the back doors, go down the street, and build a warm shelter for the people who fell off the scale in the first place.
Exactly. It is about taking the energy you use to survive the dark and using it to generate your own light.
So as we close the files on this deep dive, I want to leave you, you listening right now, with a thought to pull apart in your own life. We spend so much of our cultural and personal energy obsessed with exposing the shadows. We want to catch the people who wronged us. We want to win the argument. We want to hold the receipts and force the world to see the tally.
It's exhausting.
It really is. But if we spend all our waking hours acting as vigilantes in our own lives, when do we actually make the time to build a shelter in the light? Look at the armor you put on every morning just to survive your commute or your workplace. Consider what heavy, restrictive, deep-sea suits you might finally be safe enough to take off. And ask yourself, if you stop spending all your energy fighting the ghost of your past, what brand new key might your own struggles be waiting to forge?